And here we are. Hey, this is the Genesee County Compassion Club show. Back in the studio at allpointstv.com. It is a beautiful Wednesday. Just starting out the month of July, and it is a gorgeous day outside. I'm sure all of you are well aware it's been blistering hot here in Michigan. And today is a little bit of a reprieve from the heat, but it is absolutely gorgeous. So welcome. Thanks for joining the show today. We're going to talk about medical marijuana because that's what we like to talk about on this show. We're going to let you know what's happening down at the Genesee County Compassion Club and get you in tune with what's happening around the country when it comes to weed. So I want to say thanks to John for letting me back here in the studio at allpointstv.com. Make sure you guys check out all their pertinent podcasts, and you can catch up with all the information from the local scene here in Flint. And it's a beautiful way to get informed, without having the mass media tool being used. Anyways, all right. So I got a couple things coming up at the club I want to tell you guys about. Some good stuff happening. Of course, obviously, on most people's mind is the 4th of July. So nothing particular going on with the club there other than we want to tell you, make sure you get out and celebrate. Enjoy your freedom. This is still a beautiful country. I know a lot of folks get sort of down in the mire, thinking about all the different things that our government does and whatnot. But you know what? This is a weekend to go out and celebrate what you have, which is, you have the best place in the world to live. Whether you recognize it or not, USA is still the very best. Go to another country and you'll figure that out real quick.
20 million illegals plus is probably a good indication. We got something that everybody else wants to be part of.
Yeah, you got a good point there, John. I mean, depending on where you fall on the immigration issue is really pointless if you look at the fact that there's so many people still trying to come here. It ought to tell you that this place is awesome. It really is the land of opportunity. So, all right, we're going to talk about some awesome things going on. We do have an event coming up here, it's a very special event. It's our second annual 710 celebration. Of course, this is in celebration of the concentrates, the other forms of cannabis that are available to Michigan's medical marijuana patients. And it's just kind of a fun thing that we do at the club. So all of our members, make sure you come out on that day. It's a free event. We're going to be having a dunk tank, so you can dunk your favorite staff or board member. It'd be lots of fun. We're also going to have door prizes. We're going to have the hot dog guy there. Everybody loves the hot dog guy. He serves them up 6-7 different ways, and they're delicious. And
that's the guy, same guy at the farmer's market, right?
Yeah.
He's good.
Oh, he is good, man. The Frito one's to die for. I don't remember what it's called, but it's so good. And of course, they're Kogels, nothing but the best. So he'll be there, and like I said, we're gonna have door prizes. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Dunk tank. I know I'm forgetting about something else. Oh yeah, the caricature artist. Everybody loves her. So been at a few of our parties. If you haven't gotten your caricature done, you're missing out. She's a blast. This artist is great. She comes up to the club, helps us do our thing. She'll be outside. You can get your photo or your picture drawn up, and have some fun with that too. So that's going to be going on from 12 to 5 p.m. on July 11th. So don't forget about that. It's not actually on the 10th. It's a Sunday. So when you wake up and you're like, oh man, the 10th was yesterday, you can still have a good time. Come on down to the club. It's the 11th. Come celebrate. All right. Okay, some things I wanted to talk about. We had an interesting article in the paper just a few days ago, and I want to talk about this at length today because I know we had a few of our members that were concerned about this. Obviously, it affects us being that it's right here from Genesee County. So if you would, you can check it out yourself on MLive. Just pull up MLive, and then the name of the article, I do believe, is like 5 tips from your county prosecutor on medical marijuana. So pull that up in the search line. You can check out this article for yourself. And unfortunately, it's one of those annoying caption articles. And I don't know what it is with news websites lately. Maybe they're just ticked that I'm not actually buying the paper or watching it on TV. I don't know. But at any rate, these things just kill me. You guys feel the same way? I mean, you go to read an article and you got to flip through pictures as if you're too stupid to read or something. But at any rate, that's what this photo is. It's one of these doggone picture articles, but the actual information in the captions is what you need to read. It's actually pretty important. So we talk about that today. It's the 5 tips from our Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton on medical marijuana, and it's for you patients and caregivers. We're going to talk about that. One of the things that is brought to light on this article, I think that is real key, and it mentions it in the article as part of the reasoning for why David Layton spoke up and gave this information out in a public venue. And it is specifically in reference to a recent court decision which was done on May 16th just this year. It involved a certain dispensary and grow operation over in the Grand Rapids area. The case I'm referring to is the Ryan, forgive me for butchering this name, but it's Bylsma, Bylsma. So you can pull it up yourself, check it out. It was a Court of Appeals case. And, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to try to pretend like I know everything that this Court of Appeals decision says. And I'm not going to bore you with the 16 pages that it entails. You can read it for yourself if you want to get into the details of everything. But, the issue that I see from a patient caregiver perspective is that this Court Appeals decision does nothing but other than further muddy the water. For the defendant in this particular case, the case did not work out well. He was denied a Section 4 trial or defense, and also denied a Section 8 defense as well. And this is really the gist of what the Court of Appeals decision was getting at, was whether or not this particular individual was protected by Section 8 of our medical marijuana law. Now, we've got into the nuances before of what are these different sections of the law. So you got the first one, which is Section 4. You got the second part, which is Section 8, as everybody refers to. So these are the two things that carve out the specific protections of what you're protected for when you're operating within the confines of the medical marijuana law. So, for example, part of the section there says if you have 2.5 ounces of medical marijuana that you're providing for your patient, or your patient yourself, you have 2.5 medical marijuana ounces, you're entitled to that, and therefore you would be protected by Section 4 if you should happen to be put in court or arrested, prosecuted, so on and so forth. So that's the first part of the protection. The second part of the protection goes on to add in other details, and here's where it starts to get a little confusing, is that throughout these different court cases that have sprung up through the last few years of our medical marijuana program, the courts have added on a certain list of qualifying factors to be able to qualify for said sections, whether it be Section 4 or Section 8. And some of those qualifying factors you would think would be fairly obvious to someone, like, for example, having to be registered in the program. So kind of like similar to a driver's license, you're not actually licensed to drive unless you actually have a driver's license. Same thing with medical marijuana. You're not actually able to have medical marijuana unless you are registered with the state's medical marijuana program, and which you would receive a card for. So obviously, you're not going to be protected by the law if you're not participating in the law. It should be pretty simple and obvious. And, when we passed the law back in 2008, it was a voter passed, but it was a ballot initiative. So in other words, the people put this proposal forward, and the people voted on it, and the people passed it. But what I mean by that is that the Supreme Court themselves said the plain language that was written in this law when it was passed is to be interpreted as simple, plain language. So, as I stated before, I'm not an attorney, and as some of you may well know, when you get into what we call attorney speak, they start taking the definitions of words to the extreme measures, and sometimes it ends up not meaning what everyone intended it to mean. So lawyer speak can get very technical, and unless you're an attorney, you really can't understand it. The Supreme Court said, don't worry about that. When you read the medical marijuana law for Michigan, you just read it as a regular dude. Read it as somebody who can understand English, somebody who can look up a word in a dictionary. Not real technical stuff. However, they've ignored their own advice to some extent, and in this particular decision is a perfect example. We've got 16 pages from the Court of Appeals explaining how or why someone should be protected by these two different sections. So you can see very easily how this can all get confused and misconstrued, and it does bring a lot of questions to light. So I think that's the reason why David Layton spoke up. I think that's the reason why he is putting forth these 5 points that he gave and is providing some clarity based on what we've already seen here in the state. So if you look at what is being said in the article, the things that David Layton is mentioning are not anything that he has necessarily come up with on his own. These are direct interpretations of things that have already occurred You can look up the court cases and the examples and see that this is how it works. So when you look at his points, you need to take that into consideration. A lot of people forget about the fact that even though you've got a state permitted and organized medical marijuana program, no matter what state you're in, whether it be Michigan or even in a state like Colorado where it's legal for recreational purposes, you still have to remember that marijuana is still illegal, completely 100% illegal on a federal level. There is no exception for medical marijuana. There's no exception for CBD or other types of infused products. It's all baloney. It's all illegal according to your federal law. So when you look at the books and you have to explain someone from an administrative level like David Layton is at, you have no choice but to relay what the books say. And the books say that marijuana, no matter what, is illegal. So some of the points that are displayed in the paper, I think, have to be taken with a grain of salt and have to be looked at from a broad perspective of, how are things moving in this country and what is being done. I think that we are all aware of the fact of, I'll pick on point number 5 where he brings up landlords and how they could be subject to civil asset forfeiture if they knowingly are accepting money from, someone breaking the law, which that is just a regular law. It has no bearing, specifically for medical marijuana, although it is specifically applied there. It's a general blanket type of law that was written to prevent someone from being able to basically say, I can wash my hands of this because I wasn't the one doing it, even though they were the one receiving all of the benefit from it, i.e., like a landlord. So you can see how when we were going back in the 70s and the 80s and changing drug law and enforcement policies and sentencing guidelines and so forth, how these things came about and how they are now being enforced today. And today is a different scenario than it was 30 years ago in the 80s, back when we had Nancy Reagan and the Say No to Drugs and so on. I mean, obviously drugs are still illegal in this country and with good reason. However, we also have a different perspective when it comes to certain things like medical marijuana. And even though our federal government still points out that this is illegal, it's a Schedule I narcotic, so on and so forth, our federal government has also gone back and adjusted its budgetary allocation policies, if you will, to say, look, if people are going about their state's programs, laws, even though it's illegal on a fed level, if they're doing it according to what the state says is okay, we're not going to spend money to pursue shutting them down. So it is a very convoluted stance that our government is putting forth to its citizens. It's sort of a backwards way of doing things. You would hope that, in today's modern society, we could have advanced socially enough to be able to change policies when they need to be changed. And unfortunately, we still have a lot of folks out there, not just across the country in states where there aren't medical marijuana laws, but we also have people still here in states with medical marijuana laws that are unnecessarily suffering because of the stigma and the prosecution and the law enforcement that pursues people that are participating in these programs. There's a lot of fear associated with that. We still have a lot of folks going around saying that, I use medical marijuana regularly, but I'm not going to get signed up with the state's program because I'm not going to be on some government's list. That is a very valid mentality and it is broadly applied. We see a lot of people falling into that niche. And unfortunately, that doesn't provide them any protections. And even more unfortunate than that, when we have these sort of muddied, watered court cases, if you will, it makes it even more of a impetus for those people to say, look, I'm right. We shouldn't be getting registered because even if you do, it doesn't provide any protection. And to a degree, they may be correct. However, I still think you're better off going down the road with a driver's license than without one. And, I think that if there is a protection available, then you should take advantage of it. Kind of like insurance, if you will. And does insurance always take care of the claims? No, it does not. But it is there most of the time. And it is something that you can utilize or at least attempt to utilize. And so I think that's a good thing. And I think that's something that we should pursue, is that when we are looking at the Michigan medical marijuana law, even though you may not feel like you're going to be completely protected like you'd like to be, it's a good idea to go ahead and still take what protection is there. And so I would encourage folks out there that are using medical marijuana for medicinal purposes. If you haven't gotten registered, get registered. It's a $60 fee to the state. It's good for 2 years. Yes, you're going to have to go spend money at the doctor's office, but it's worth your while. And it's kind of like one of those, like I just mentioned, like insurance. You're a lot better off paying up front than you are not having it when you need it. And, not having the protection of the law be applied to you when it could have been, could be devastating. And, so that's something I would, even though we're looking at these court cases and we're saying, man, our law is getting eroded away on every single side, and the protections that we thought were there just aren't. Even though we can say that, we can still also say, look, if you're following the rules and you're staying within the guidelines, you will be protected. And I have seen quite a few court cases that have ended up being able to properly utilize that when they were properly following the guidelines, and the cases were dismissed, even up into the point of when they went through jury trials. So sometimes people do have to go through processes to sort of hammer out what is and what isn't. And that is very unfortunate, but that is a product of our own society. And there's people that have been caught in that bandwagon on all sides in all types of different situations for years. And it has nothing to do with medical marijuana. So if we need to look at those processes as a whole, maybe we should. But when we're looking at medical marijuana, I would definitely recommend, if you don't have a card, go get one. If you've expired, get it renewed. These are not difficult processes to go through, but they do still provide some protections. Now, moving back on to David Layton's 5 points, the first thing I wanted to point out is that he mentions patients and caregivers. So let me pull this up here. All right. And the first thing I want to point out is when you're reading the article, it says here, David Layton issued 5 reminders for medical marijuana users. So I want to point out that these things that we're talking about here, these are reminders. These are nothing new. It's just sort of being reiterated, and I don't want to say redefined, but defined again. Okay? So the first one is patients and caregivers. And again, that was in relation to the Ryan Bislema case, or Bilsma? Okay. Confusing case. All right. Anyways, going back to patients and caregivers, it says the only person that may lawfully deliver marijuana to an MMA patient is that patient's registered caregiver, according to Layton. So I'm reading to you right from MLive. Says the state's medical marijuana law allows a patient to designate one caregiver who can then cultivate and deliver marijuana up to 5 designated patients. You have to be at least 21. No felony illegal drug convictions, any violent or any felony convictions within the past 10 years. So there's your parameters, qualifying parameters to be a caregiver. Once you are a caregiver, you can possess up to 12 plants or 2.5 ounces of usable marijuana per patient. So very basic. I think most of our club members are all well aware of those rules. Pretty simple. So you can deal with your patients. Patients have to deal with their caregiver. All right, so here's one of the things you need to understand as a patient, and this is where it's going to hurt, okay? If you didn't know this already, when you are a patient and you are acquiring marijuana from a caregiver who is not on your card, you are putting that caregiver at risk because of the fact that you guys you are not tied together through the department's registry program. You are not afforded all of the protections of the law. And that's one of the things that this court case gets into. There are arguments on both sides of the case that say, well, the Court of Appeals did say that Section 4 and Section 8 operate separately and provide separate protections, so therefore that's a valid defense. But it also says that that person was not protected. So it's a very confusing thing. Our county prosecutor is saying, look, you need to be dealing with the people that are on your card. All right, that's how you get protected. If you do something outside of that, then you are not necessarily protected by the law. And that's something that we need to take a look at. I think that's something that patients need to start speaking up about, because right now the clamp that is being put down around the state is on caregivers. They want to make sure that caregivers are only dealing with their 5 patients. And when you deal with patients, you know that patients don't always want what caregivers have. So this is a problem. And if patients are going to be allowed access to medication, then they need to be allowed access. And they obviously do not want to put people in jeopardy who think they're lawfully abiding in the program by doing that. So we need to discuss this dilemma. It's something that's going to have to be continued to be hashed out. And unfortunately, our court systems right now are not providing the clarity that we would like to see. In the meantime, we've got legislation that's being brewed at the state capitol to so-called fix this issue. However, we have to be very careful on what that fix is. So we need to stay in tune, and we need to start getting involved and in gear with what our political agenda is portraying to us. You know what I mean? Patients have got to start speaking up and start conveying their concerns about their protections and also their medications. So that's something that needs to be discussed. All right. Secondly, the second point that David Layton points out is overages. It says here, patient authorized to grow marijuana plants or a certified caregiver may not sell or give their overages, any amount exceeding 2.5 ounces of marijuana, or that amount that a patient is known to reasonably need to treat their medical condition, to a person who is not formally connected to them through the Michigan Medical Marijuana Program. So he's essentially saying the same thing twice and stating that patients need to work with their caregiver, and that's it. So what we need to do is, first of all, we have to look at how are the patient's needs being met and how are the protections being provided. All right. Next thing is the dispensaries. All right. So this is number 3 on his list. It says here, there is no lawful business that can receive overages of marijuana for resale or delivery for donation to third parties just because that third person has a MMMA card, i.e. no marijuana dispensaries. Any person delivering to persons not their registered patient or running a business that allows such deliveries is unlawfully delivering marijuana subject to prosecution under the Controlled Substances Act, according to Layton. So there you have it. Once again, he's stating that you need to be working with the people that are on your card. Pretty simple. All right, next thing is local zoning. A permit relating to zoning or the allowance of marijuana business by a local municipality does not change any of the foregoing under state law as it currently exists. So in other words, if there is a compassion center, dispensary, co-op, health clinic, whatever you want to call it, if it's already been licensed in that community, just because the community licensed it does not necessarily mean that it's going to be protected by the law. It may be actually prosecuted by the law, even though they are permitted in that area. So that's a fact. And he felt it necessary to point that out. So something to think about. All right. And lastly, we already discussed this a little bit. He's talking about landlords. So this is usually dealt with, like I said, when it comes to civil asset forfeiture. And obviously, I think this is something that most of us would agree needs to have reform. Our state passed a package of bills last year that dealt with civil asset forfeiture, but they did very little to really curb the practice or how it is actually enacted. They created a certain list that has to be followed, certain checkup points and so on and so forth. But by law, they are still able to seize assets without actually convicting someone of a crime. And I think that should be a pivotal point, really, of how the law is actually conducted. And right now, it's done the other way. Michigan ranks as one of the worst states in the nation when it comes to our civil asset forfeiture laws. So I think that's something that should be relooked at by our legislature and something that should be reconsidered by our communities. It's obvious that these are used by various police departments, and sometimes it is reported that people feel it's being abused. And I think that it's something that has to be looked at from a legislative perspective, and I think it's quite preposterous that the government can take things without actually convicting someone of a crime. I thought we had something in our Constitution against that. Maybe not. John?
Yeah, I was just trying to find the Constitution. Yeah, hold on, but I have a copy of it somewhere. But it does. No, I think that's one of the the guarantees. That you got to have due process, and taking something away and permanently keeping it is a violation, in my opinion. But see, it's all about money, and it just goes to show you how corrupt the system has become, because that is so entrenched, very few people even blink when that's brought up. I mean, and they should be more outraged. There should be more outrage on this than there is. And I've seen politicians just gleefully gloat that they can pass this kind of legislation, that they can seize assets without even, proving the person guilty of any, crime.
Yeah.
So, but no, it's like, it just goes to show you the general decay of this country. It really does.
Yeah. Well, those are the 5 points from David Layton. I wanted to share those with you because, it is pretty concise. He does point out where he stands at. A lot of folks feel that that's a change in his policy or a change in his viewpoints. He started out the article by saying, hey, look, this is a reminder of current policy. So I think it's a message that, to the patients and caregivers in Genesee County, we need to be watching our P's and Q's. We need to make sure that we're staying within our limits. We need to make sure that we're dealing with our patients and our patients are dealing with our caregivers. There has to be a place where patients can go to get their medication. There has to be a providing place for them. And simply just stating in the law that, a caregiver can provide this, it doesn't really provide enough direction to a patient. And let's be realistic. So there's going to have to be, whether you want to close all the businesses in the county and around the state and make them reopen as something else, there's always going to have to be some type of a contact point where the patient can meet the product. It's simple as that. And I think that, the best way for this to happen is so that local communities can regulate how they feel this should happen, where it should happen, how it should happen, when it should happen, because they know what's right for their communities. And when we try to do this on a large scale, it doesn't play out as evenly. I mean, it's not something that you can just blanket all over everybody and, make them all happy. So I think there needs to be room for local control, but I think above that, there needs to be protection for patients. Patients need to be able to find a caregiver. They need to be able to change their caregiver if their medication isn't satisfactory. And ultimately, the patients need to be able to access medication. There's a lot of patients out there that produce their own medication, but they don't produce enough. Or maybe the type of medication they provide for themselves isn't the type that they need all the time. They need variety, or they need another form of it, or they need it to be processed into something that makes it ingestible for them. So there's a lot of reasons why patients need caregivers, and they need to be able to access multiple caregivers, if you will, so that they have options. And if they need to switch who they're registered through so that they can access a patient's or a caregiver's meds, then make the switch. Nobody says you can't switch back. It costs $10 at the state's level to fill out a change form. That's not that difficult thing to do. Fill it out, drop it in the mail, you're done, you're protected. Change it up again in a week later if you need to. Is that cumbersome? Yes, it's cumbersome. That's why we need a change in the law. That's why we need decent administration of our policies. That's why we need to have real clarification when it comes to our courts. And the biggest thing that I could encourage you to do, besides follow the law, is get involved. We have a primary coming up here in August where you're going to have the ability to go and vote in your local elections, determine who's going to be on your township boards, who's going to be working the areas that you live in and controlling those areas. And this is your opportunity to start to dictate how that happens. And if you're not participating, then you have no dog in the fight. You're done.
The notice, and this is just my own observation, but Layton might have been reissue that, because basically, even though he's the prosecutor in this county, and he's, and I have issues with the man on other issues, but I mean, I think for the medical marijuana community, it's a very good person to have on board for your movement, but he's probably a reminder without actually stating this. It's like, look, even though we're doing this and I'm allowing this, the Attorney General of the state of Michigan is not on board. So basically, he probably has to make sure that if anything comes around, somebody's going to say, well, he was lax on this. Yeah. He's trying to reemphasize, this is the law. This is what we're trying to. Yeah. I think that's his own protection.
You make a good point, John, because his job is to enforce the law. It's not to make opinions. He's not it's not a political type of thing. Once you're the prosecuting attorney, your job is to enforce the law, and that's what he's doing. And right now, the law is what it is. You're illegal on a federal level. That needs to change. They're picking apart your Michigan medical marijuana law left and right. That needs to stop. They're eroding away your rights and your ability to make something for yourself. So I think that until we can change those things, that from a prosecutor's position, they have no choice but to enforce what is right there in front of them. So, and in a way, that's kind of a good thing. You don't really want them just deciding what they can and can't do. We need to have consistency from our leadership. That's for sure. So, and I don't think that what we're seeing right now is inconsistent from David Layton. You can see that around Genesee County, there's a lot of different medical marijuana related businesses. The county has certainly benefited from this since 2008. There's a lot of buildings now that have tenants in them that didn't previously have them. There's a lot of businesses that exist now that previously did not. And of course, along with that are jobs. And that's really what this county needs more than anything, other than a reduction in crime, is jobs. Of course, we need clean water. I don't want to fail to mention that. And again, I think that also makes another point that, there are other priorities in this town besides marijuana. We've got people out there who are, they are utilizing the program and they are doing everything they can to make sure that they're staying in their legal guidelines. The speed limit says 65, they're doing 62. All right. And I think that is where we need to be at as a community. We need to get to 62 or whatever it is and stick to it. The law is there. The protections are still there. Nothing's changed. But we need to make sure that what we are doing is right and that we're doing it for the right reasons. When you talk to your patient, you need to check on them. You need to see how are they doing. How is this stuff working for them? How much is it do you need? How much are you using? Can we adjust your dosage? Do we need to adjust your dosage? How's this strain working for you? Or should we switch that up? You need to treat this and remember that this is medicine. And we are, in fact, helping sick people here. And that's what this is for. So let's just remember that. And I think that, obviously, like John pointed out, Genesee County has certainly been a green light, if you will, in the state. I mean, we got the High Times Cup going on here, for goodness sake. So in some ways, all of that attention kind of works against us in a negative manner as well, because there's a lot of folks out there that still are completely 100% vehemently against marijuana, whether it's medical or not. And we have to remember that. So it's not that we want to go jamming down things that we like down other people's throat. We need to be tolerant and considerate at the same time. So, we need to look at the grand picture here, keep things in mind, make sure that we're following the rules, and make sure that we're doing it the right way. Don't just go through the motions. Make sure that, you're taking this seriously, whether you're a patient, you're using your medication, you need to keep it in a safe place. When you're transporting it, it needs to be out of the reach of you and anybody else in that vehicle. When you're using your medication, it needs to be done in a private area. Remember, it's not legal to consume this in public. And, I get out and about every now and then, and I can tell you that you can smell weed in the air a lot more often now than you did, back before 2008. People are just a lot more open with it than they were before. And in some ways, we're feeling the backlash of that. So let's remember what the rules are. Let's remember to stick with them. And let's remember that this is a privilege that we have that we don't want to have taken away. You could look at the folks just, both states south of us, Illinois, Ohio. I mean, they don't have medical marijuana there. And you could say, well, they got this and that. Well, talk to the patients in that state and ask them if they've got medical marijuana. The answer is no. I
want to ask you a question. I'm putting you on the spot here, I guess. But you know quite a bit about the medical marijuana laws of different parts of the country and also the legalization efforts, that are afoot. Where would you like to see Michigan in, say, 2 years? Who would you want to see emulate?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, John, because as far as medical marijuana programs go, there's a lot of variances to how these work. Some states are providing it solely, through their own institutions, so it's a very limited access, very difficult thing to get to. Other states like ours have the patient caregiver system. California is completely different, where you've got a co-op collective system going on out there. So there's a lot of variances when it comes to medical marijuana. Ultimately, for patients and caregivers to receive legal protection for what it is that they're trying to do right now, I think what I'd like to see the state move to is something more along the lines of Colorado or Washington or Alaska, where we've expanded the market for marijuana, but really by doing that, what we've done is provide 100% protection for people that need this on a medical basis. And that's why I say that. I'm not as big on, let's go recreational, let's let everybody have weed, and let's blow the market up. That'll all come in due time, and I'm not in a rush to get there. But what I am in a rush to see is that the people that need this and use this and do this for legit medicinal reasons get the protection that they actually deserve. And unfortunately, right now in Michigan, that is not happening.
I do bring up, too. I don't know that I've told you about this before. A woman who used to do a show from the studio was very vehemently against medical marijuana, and she met with you guys. And I remember you guys, she and Eric had a kind of an exchange out here in the green room. And then about a year later, she came back. About a year later, she was doing something else. She came back and she admitted. Now she's on board for medical marijuana because she talked to people at different conferences about, the use of this stuff. And she met a family that had to move out to a state like Colorado, I think it was Colorado, for her daughter who was have epileptic seizures so often it was actually going to destroy her brain. It continues the way it was, and now from like 20 or 30 a day down to maybe a couple a week because she's allowed to use cannabis, in a medical form. That's like I forget the stuff that they call for the child. It was it is formulated for children for that.
Yeah, the CBD stuff.
Yeah. John. Anyway, so she said, I have to admit that, I have to really I had to rethink my position. So, it was largely, though, because of your connection with the studio and with you guys, you and Eric, Gunnell, and she was actually, kind of impressed her that you guys actually, actually stood your ground, and now you guys, a lot of people don't give you guys credit enough for what you guys, a lot of people, too, who have been with NORML and other organizations for years, they took a lot of brunt of it, and, they were just vilified and mocked. Yeah. And now they've actually stuck to their guns, and I respect that, because I was very much against, the medical marijuana stuff,
And, John, you're right. The stigma around marijuana is still very strong. Whether people are, willing to take it with a grain of salt and just sort of pass it on by. But I tell you, the majority of folks out there really are starting to wake up to the fact that this is something that is relatively benign, has, hardly any side effects to speak of. Certainly a heck of a lot less side effects than 90% of the stuff you see advertised on your TV at night. And you can testify to yourself the amount of side effects that those medications have. And compared to what marijuana is, it's hardly even comparable. So you have to look at that. And then you also are starting to hear more and more stories about the different reliefs that marijuana provides. And it is a plural thing. There are different ailments out there, and marijuana works synergistically with the body and provides amazing results to a whole myriad of different types of symptoms. And we're learning this, maybe it's mostly anecdotal, but nevertheless, we're still learning this and seeing it happen on a daily basis. And stuff like that, where you have children, of course, everybody loves to pull out the child story because, pulls at the heartstrings. But, there's a whole lot of adults out there that are receiving the benefit of medical marijuana and just about come to tears telling you what the difference is that it has made in their life. And it's not because they're stoned. It's because they're not in pain anymore. It's because they actually were able to eat yesterday. Or, maybe it's because it didn't tear their stomach up and their stomach was tore up.
Even if they were stoned, but look at the damage that marijuana does comparison to the opiates.
Yeah.
So, even if they're
stoned, the alternative, and a lot of times it's significantly better. So I think it is getting through. The message is slowly getting through. The stigma is slowly breaking down, but we've still got a long ways to go. And as I pointed out in the show today, we still have a tremendous amount of change that needs to happen on a legislative level, not only here in Michigan and at the local level, but also on the federal level, because this is still illegal federally and people are still going to jail for this. So until we can stop that, then we need to continue fighting and we need to continue staying involved. So I'd encourage you to do that this week. If you guys haven't had a chance to look up who your local candidates are for your local government, such as like your city or your township, whatever it is, now's the time to do so. You've got about a month left before the primaries come up. You want to go to your calendar in August and mark that day so that you actually get out and vote, because you can have a bigger impact on a primary race than you can on a regular election race. And the reason is because voter turnout is so terrible. So let's change that. Let's get involved and quit complaining about our terrible government when really what we should be looking at is our terrible voter turnout. Hello? All right, I'll quit preaching at you. Okay, guys, thanks for joining me this week. That's what I have for you here. This is the Genesee County Compassion Club show coming to you from allpointstv.com. Thank you, John, for letting me back here in the studio. I appreciate us being able to speak freely, and I am appreciative to our country for having that benefit. So go out and enjoy your 4th of July this weekend and celebrate your benefits, all right? Thanks, guys. Have a good week.